in the blackest soils grow the fairest flowers, and the loftiest and strongest trees spring heavenward among the rocks. J.G. Holland. Poverty is very terrible, and sometimes kills the very soul within us. But it is the north wind that lashes men into Vikings. It is the soft, luscious south wind which lulls them to lotus dreams. Oyuda. Poverty is the sixth sense. German proverb. It is not every calamity that is a curse, and early adversity is often a blessing. Surmounted difficulties not only teach, but hearten us in our future struggles. Sharp. There can be no doubt that the captains of industry today, using that term in its broadest sense, are men who began life as poor boys. Seth Low. 'Tis a common proof that lowliness is young ambition's ladder. Shakespeare. I am a child of the court, said a pretty little girl at a children's party in Denmark. My father is groom of the chambers, which is a very high office, and those whose names end with sen, she added, can never be anything at all. We must put our arms akimbo and make the elbows quite pointed, so as to keep these sen people at a great distance. But my papa can buy $100 worth of bonbons and give them away to children, angrily exclaimed the daughter of the rich merchant Peter Sen. Can your papa do that? Yes, chimed in the daughter of an editor. My papa can put your papa and everybody's papa into the newspaper. All sorts of people are afraid of him, my papa says, for he can do as he likes with the paper. Oh, if I could be one of them, thought a little boy peeping through the crack of the door, by permission of the cook for whom he had been turning the spit. But no, his parents had not even a penny to spare, and his name ended in sen. Years afterwards, when the children of the party had become men and women, some of them went to see a splendid house filled with all kinds of beautiful and valuable objects. There they met the owner, once the very boy who thought it so great a privilege to peep at them through a crack in the door as they played. He had become the great sculptor Thorwaldsen. This sketch is adapted from a story by a poor Danish cobbler's son, another whose name did not keep him from becoming famous, Hans Christian Andersen. There is no fear of my starving, father, said the deaf boy, Quito, begging to be taken from the poor house and allowed to struggle for an education. We are in the midst of plenty, and I know how to prevent hunger. The Hottentots subsist a long time on nothing but a little gum. They also, when hungry, tie a ligature around their bodies. Can I not do so too? The hedges furnish blackberries and nuts, and the fields turnips. A hayrick will make an excellent bed. The poor deaf boy with a drunken father, who was thought capable of nothing better than making shoes as a pauper, became one of the greatest biblical scholars in the world. His first book was written in the workhouse. Creon was a Greek slave, as a writer tells the story in Kate Field's Washington, but he was also a slave of the genius of art. Beauty was his god, and he worshipped it with rapt adoration. It was after the repulse of the great Persian invader, and a law was in force that under penalty of death no one should espouse art except freemen. When the law was enacted, he was engaged upon a group for which he hoped some day to receive the commendation of Phidias, the greatest sculptor living, and even the praise of Pericles. What was to be done? Into the marble block before him, Creon had put his head, his heart, his soul, his life. On his knees, from day to day, he had prayed for fresh inspiration, new skill. He believed, gratefully and proudly, that Apollo, answering his prayers, had directed his hand and had breathed into the figures the life that seemed to animate them. But now all the gods seemed to have deserted him. Cleone, his devoted sister, felt the blow as deeply as her brother. "O Aphrodite," she prayed, "immortal Aphrodite, high enthroned child of Zeus, my queen, my goddess, my patron at whose shrine I have daily laid my offerings, to be now my friend, the friend of my brother." Then to her brother she said, "O Creon, go to the cellar beneath our house. It is dark, but I will furnish light and food. Continue your work. The gods will befriend us." To the cellar Creon went, and guarded and attended by his sister day and night, he proceeded with his glorious but dangerous task. About this time all Greece was invited to Athens to behold an exhibit of works of art. The display took place in the Agora. Pericles presided. At his side was Aspasia, Phidias, Socrates, Sophocles, and other renowned men stood near him. The works of the great masters were there, but one group far more beautiful than the rest, a group that Apollo himself must have chiseled, challenged universal attention, exciting at the same time no little envy among rival artists. Who is the sculptor of this group? None could tell. Heralds repeated the question, but there was no answer. A mystery, then. Can it be the work of a slave? Amid great commotion, a beautiful maiden with disarranged dress, disheveled hair, a determined expression in her eyes, and with closed lips, was dragged into the Agora. "This woman," cried the officers, "this woman knows the sculptor. We are sure of it, but she will not tell his name." Cleone was questioned, but was silent. She was informed of the penalty of her conduct, but her lips remained closed. "Then," said Pericles, "the law is imperative, and I am the minister of the law. Take the maid to the dungeon." As he spoke, a youth with flowing hair, emaciated but with black eyes that beamed with the flashing light of genius, rushed forward, and flinging himself before him, exclaimed, "O Pericles, forgive and save the maid! She is my sister. I am the culprit. The group is the work of my hands, the hands of a slave." The indignant crowd interrupted him and cried, "To the dungeon! To the dungeon with the slave!" "As I live, no!" said Pericles, rising. "Behold that group! Apollo decides by it that there is something higher in Greece than an unjust law. The highest purpose of law should be the development of the beautiful. If Athens lives in the memory and affections of men, it is her duty to art that will immortalize her. Not to the dungeon, but to my side bring the youth." And there, in the presence of the assembled multitude, Aspasia placed the crown of olives, which she held in her hands, on the brow of Creon, and at the same time, amid universal plaudits, she tenderly kissed Creon's affectionate and devoted sister. The Athenians erected a statue to Aesop, who was born a slave, that men might know that the way to honor is open to all. In Greece, wealth and immortality were the sure reward of the man who could distinguish himself in art, literature, or war. No other country ever did so much to encourage and inspire struggling merit. "I was born in poverty," said Vice President Henry Wilson. "Want sat by my cradle. I know what it is to ask a mother for bread when she has none to give. I left my home at 10 years of age and served an apprenticeship of 11 years, receiving a month's schooling each year, and at the end of 11 years of hard work, a yoke of oxen and 6 sheep, which brought me $84. I never spent the sum of $1 for pleasure, counting every penny from the time I was born till I was 21 years of age. I know what it is to travel weary miles and ask my fellow men to give me leave to toil. In the first month after I was 21 years of age, I went into the woods, drove a team, and cut mill logs. I rose in the morning before daylight and worked hard till after dark, and received the magnificent sum of $6 for the month's work. Each of these dollars looked as large to me as the moon looks tonight. Mr. Wilson determined never to lose an opportunity for self-culture or self-advancement. Few men knew so well the value of spare moments. He seized them as though they were gold, and would not let one pass until he had wrung from it every possibility. He managed to read 1,000 good books before he was 21. What a lesson for boys on a farm! When he left the farm, he started on foot for Natick, Mass, over 100 miles distance, to learn the cobbler's trade. He went through Boston that he might see Bunker Hill Monument and other historical landmarks. The whole trip cost him but $1.06. In a year he was the head of a debating club at Natick. Before 8 years had passed, he made his great speech against slavery in the Massachusetts legislature. 12 years later, he stood shoulder to shoulder with the polished Sumner in Congress. With him, every occasion was a great occasion. He ground every circumstance of his life into material for success. Don't go about the town any longer in that outlandish rig. Let me give you an order on the store. Dress up a little, Horace. Horace Greeley looked down on his clothes as if he had never before noticed how seedy they were, and replied, "You see, Mr. Sterrett, my father is on a new place, and I want to help him all I can." He had spent but $6 for personal expenses in 7 months, and was to receive $135 from Judge J. M. Sterrett of the Erie Gazette for substitute work. He retained but $15 and gave the rest to his father, with whom he had moved from Vermont to western Pennsylvania, and for whom he had camped out many a night to guard the sheep from wolves. He was nearly 21, and, although tall and gawky, with tow-colored hair, a pale face, and whining voice, he resolved to seek his fortune in New York City. Slinging his bundle of clothes on a stick over his shoulder, he walked 60 miles through the woods to Buffalo, rode on a canal boat to Albany, descended the Hudson in a barge, and reached New York just as the sun was rising. August 18, 1831. He found board over a saloon at $2.50 a week. His journey of 600 miles had cost him but $5. 4 days Horace wandered up and down the streets, going into scores of buildings and asking if they wanted a hand, but no was the invariable reply. His quaint appearance led many to think he was an escaped apprentice. One Sunday at his boarding place, he heard that printers were wanted at West's printing office. He was at the door at 5 o'clock Monday morning, and asked the foreman for a job at 7. The latter had no idea that a country greenhorn could set type for a polyglot testament on which help was needed, but said, "Fix up a case for him, and we'll see if he can do anything." When the proprietor came in, he objected to the newcomer and told the foreman to let him go when his first day's work was done. That night, Horace showed a proof of the largest and most correct day's work that had then been done. In 10 years he was a partner in a small printing office. He founded the New Yorker, the best weekly paper in the United States, but it was not profitable. When Harrison was nominated for president in 1840, Greeley started the Log Cabin, which reached the then fabulous circulation of 90,000. But on this paper at a penny per copy, he made no money. His next venture was the New York Tribune, price 1 cent. To start it, he borrowed $1,000 and printed 5,000 copies of the first number. It was difficult to give them all away. He began with 600 subscribers and increased the list to 11,000 in 6 weeks. The demand for the Tribune grew faster than new machinery could be obtained to print it. It was a paper whose editor, whatever his mistakes, always tried to be right. James Gordon Bennett had made a failure of his New York Courier in 1825, of the Globe in 1832, and of the Pennsylvanian a little later, and was only known as a clever writer for the press, who had saved a few $100s by hard labor and strict economy for 14 years. In 1835, he asked Horace Greeley to join him in starting a new daily paper, the New York Herald. Greeley declined, but recommended 2 young printers, who formed partnership with Bennett, and the Herald was started on May 6, 1835, with a cash capital to pay expenses for 10 days. Bennett hired a small cellar in Wall Street, furnished it with a chair and a desk composed of a plank supported by 2 barrels, and there, doing all the work except the printing, began the work of making a really great daily newspaper, a thing then unknown in America, as all its predecessors were party organs. Steadily, the young man struggled towards his ideal, giving the news fresh and crisp from an ever-widening area, until his paper was famous for giving the current story of the world as fully and quickly as any competitor, and often much more thoroughly and far more promptly. Neither labor nor expense was spared in obtaining prompt and reliable information on every topic of general interest. It was an uphill job, but its completion was finally marked by the opening at the corner of Broadway and Ann Street of the most complete newspaper establishment then known. One of the first things to attract the attention on entering George W. Child's private office in Philadelphia was this motto, which was the keynote of the success of a boy who started with no chance. Nihil sine labore. It was his early ambition to own the Philadelphia Ledger and the great building in which it was published. But how could a poor boy working for $2 a week ever hope to own such a great paper? However, he had great determination and indomitable energy, and as soon as he had saved a few $100s as a clerk in a bookstore, he began business as a publisher. He made great hits in some of the works he published, such as Kane's Arctic Expedition. He had a keen sense of what would please the public, and there seemed no end to his industry. In spite of the fact that the Ledger was losing money every day, his friends could not dissuade him from buying it, and in 1864 the dreams of his boyhood found fulfillment. He doubled the subscription price, lowered the advertising rates, to the astonishment of everybody, and the paper entered upon a career of remarkable prosperity, the profits sometimes amounting to over $400,000 a year. He always refused to lower the wages of his employees, even when every other establishment in Philadelphia was doing so. At a banquet in Lyons, nearly a century and a half ago, a discussion arose in regard to the meaning of a painting representing some scene in the mythology or history of Greece. Seeing that the discussion was growing warm, the host turned to one of the waiters and asked him to explain the picture. Greatly to the surprise of the company, the servant gave a clear, concise account of the whole subject, so plain and convincing that it at once settled the dispute. "In what school have you studied, monsieur?" asked one of the guests, addressing the waiter with great respect. "I have studied in many schools, Monseigneur," replied the young servant, "but the school in which I studied longest and learned most is the school of adversity." Well had he profited by poverty's lessons, for, although then but a poor waiter, all Europe soon rang with the fame of the writings of the greatest genius of his age and country, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The smooth sand beach of Lake Erie constituted the foolscap on which, for want of other material, P.R. Spencer, a barefoot boy with no chance, perfected the essential principles of the Spencerian system of penmanship, the most beautiful exposition of graphic art. For 8 years William Cobbett had followed the plough. When he ran away to London, copied law papers for 8 or 9 months, and then enlisted in an infantry regiment. During his first year of soldier life, he subscribed to a circulating library at Chatham, read every book in it, and began to study. "I learned grammar when I was a private soldier on the pay of 6 pence a day. The edge of my berth, or that of the guard bed, was my seat to study in. My knapsack was my bookcase. A bit of board lying on my lap was my writing table, and the task did not demand anything like a year of my life. I had no money to purchase candles or oil. In winter it was rarely that I could get any evening light but that of the fire, and only my turn even of that. To buy a pen or a sheet of paper, I was compelled to forego some portion of my food, though in a state of half starvation. I had no moment of time that I could call my own, and I had to read and write amidst the talking, laughing, singing, whistling, and bawling of at least half a score of the most thoughtless of men, and that too in the hours of their freedom from all control. Think not lightly of the farthing I had to give now and then for pen, ink, or paper. That farthing was, alas, a great sum to me. I was as tall as I am now, and I had great health and great exercise. The whole of the money not expended for us at market was 2 pence a week for each man. I remember, and well I may, that upon one occasion I had, after all absolutely necessary expenses, made shift to have a halfpenny in reserve, which I had destined for the purpose of a red herring in the morning, but so hungry as to be hardly able to endure life. When I pulled off my clothes at night, I found that I had lost my halfpenny. I buried my head in the miserable sheet and rug and cried like a child. But Cobbett made even his poverty and hard circumstances serve his all-absorbing passion for knowledge and success. "If I," said he, "under such circumstances could encounter and overcome this task, can there be in the whole world a youth to find any excuse for its non-performance?" Humphrey Davy had but a slender chance to acquire great scientific knowledge, yet he had true metal in him, and he made even old pans, kettles, and bottles contribute to his success, as he experimented and studied in the attic of the apothecary store where he worked. "Many a farmer's son," says Thurlow Weed, "has found the best opportunities for mental improvement in his intervals of leisure while tending sapbush. Such, at any rate, was my own experience. At night you had only to feed the kettles and keep up the fires, the sap having been gathered and the wood cut before dark. During the day we would always lay in a good stock of fat pine, by the light of which, blazing bright before the sugar house, I passed many a delightful night in reading. I remember in this way to have a history of the French Revolution, and to have obtained a better and more enduring knowledge of its events and horrors, and of the actors in that great national tragedy, than I have received from all subsequent reading I remember also how happy I was in being able to borrow the books of a Mr. Keyes after a 2-mile tramp through the snow, shoeless, my feet swaddled in remnants of rag carpet. "May I have a holiday tomorrow, father?" asked Theodore Parker one August afternoon. The poor Lexington's millwright looked in surprise at his youngest son, for it was a busy time, but he saw from the boy's earnest face that he had no ordinary object in view, and granted the request. Theodore rose very early the next morning, walked through the dust 10 miles to Harvard College, and presented himself for a candidate for admission. He had been unable to attend school regularly since he was 8 years old, but he had managed to go 3 months each winter, and had reviewed his lessons again and again as he followed the plow or worked at other tasks. All his odd moments had been hoarded, too, for reading useful books, which he borrowed. One book he could not borrow, but he felt that he must have it. So on summer mornings he rose long before the sun and picked bushel after bushel of berries, which he sent to Boston, and so got the money to buy that coveted Latin dictionary. "Well done, my boy," said the millwright when his son came home late at night and told of his successful examination. "But, Theodore, I cannot afford to keep you there." "True, father," said Theodore. "I am not going to stay there. I shall study at home at odd times and thus prepare myself for a final examination, which will give me a diploma." He did this, and by teaching school as he grew older, got money to study for 2 years at Harvard, where he was graduated with honor. Years after, when, as the trusted friend and advisor of Seward, Chase, Sumner, Garrison, Horace Mann, and Wendell Phillips, his influence for good was felt in the hearts of all his countrymen, it was a pleasure for him to recall his early struggles and triumphs among the rocks and bushes of Lexington. "The proudest moments of my life," said Elihu Burritt, "was when I had first gained the full meaning of the first 15 lines of Homer's Iliad." Elihu Burritt's father died when he was 16, and Elihu was apprenticed to a blacksmith in his native village of New Britain, Con. He had to work at the forge for 10 or 12 hours a day, but while blowing the bellows, he would solve mentally difficult problems in arithmetic. In a diary kept at Worcester, whither he went some 10 years later to enjoy its library privileges, are such entries as these: Monday, June 18, headache, 40 pages Cuvier's Theory of the Earth, 64 pages French, 11 hours forging. Tuesday, June 19th, 60 lines Hebrew, 30 Danish, 10 lines Bohemian, 9 lines Polish, 15 names of stars, 10 hours forging. Wednesday, June 20, 25 lines Hebrew, 8 lines Syriac, 11 hours forging. He mastered 18 languages and 32 dialects. He became eminent as the learned blacksmith, and for his noble work in the service of humanity. Edward Everett said of the manner in which this boy with no chance acquired great learning, "It is enough to make one who has good opportunities for education hang his head in shame." The barefoot Christine Nilsson in remote Sweden had little chance, but she won the admiration of the world for her wondrous power of song, combined with rare womanly grace. "Let me say in regard to your adverse worldly circumstances," says Dr. Talmage to young men, "that you are on a level now with those who are finally to succeed. Mark my words, and think of it 30 years from now. you will find that those who are then the millionaires of this country, who are the orators of the country, who are the poets of the country, who are the strong merchants of the country, who are the great philanthropists of the country, mightiest in the church and state, are now on a level with you, not an inch above you.